So in this video, we're going to add Lighthouse to our continuous integration workflow, and that's going to help us maintain a consistent level of performance, or at least be alerted early when our performance dips. If you're not familiar with Lighthouse, let me give you a quick demo. So if you were to go to Wikipedia here, just as a random example of a common site that people would visit, you can take the URL, and I prefer to do this in web.dev. You can also do it in DevTools. But if you go to web.dev and you do test my site, you can paste the URL here and do a run audit. This is one way to do it. There's also page speed insights. So what this is doing is it's going to go through and test the performance on mobile at a low bandwidth rate, on lower performance specs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you can see that it finished, and we're getting a 95 for performance, which is pretty good actually. And then accessibility is an 83, best practices is a 93, and SEO is an 86. So you can click this view report, and this is what you would get in your dev tools. You can see we got a redirect for that, so we might want to put this, URL in proper, but let's ignore that for now. We're just trying to kind of give a quick introduction to what Lighthouse is if you aren't familiar. So what's neat about this is it will give you some screenshots of what it looks like on mobile for a person loading, just kind of step by step. And then it also gives you some metrics to try to hit, and you can even dig down into some of these things and get some helpful hints. The reason I like to do this on web.dev is because it's like a dedicated server and it's not your hardware that's going to be affecting it or your extensions, or even if you're in incognito mode and you're not using extensions, it's still based on your hardware. So you can get fluctuations. So it's a little bit easier to control. So that's as far as I'm going to go as far as explaining Lighthouse. There's tons of videos on it if you want to check it out. Google actually has a lot of good instructional stuff if you're not that familiar with it. But what's a really cool idea to me is that we can add an automated version of this into our pipeline that can actually block pull requests if we don't meet specific measurements of performance. So let's take our site, for example, this really simple one, which we should score well on. So in the previous video, we hosted this up on Vercel, and we're just going to take that URL that they've given us and plug that into web.dev. So we'll switch URL, run an audit here real quick, just so we can kind of see what it looks like before we start installing it locally. So when it completes, you can see that we have some really good scores because it's such a simple site, of course. We are lacking on SEO. If we view that report, we can scroll down here, and then there'll be some interesting little tidbits for us. In particular, it says the document does not have a meta description, so that's pretty nice. And then mobile friendly, the tap targets are not sized appropriately. What's really cool about this is, let's take a simple one like this, and they have this learn more button. You can click that, and they'll give you some documentation about pretty much every rule. It's quite amazing. And you can scroll through here. So if you're not really familiar with what is a meta description, they give you some examples. They explain kind of what to do and what not to do, as you can see. It's a really great resource. It's kind of like having your own little auditor from Google just poking around in your site and telling you how to improve things. So let's see how we can install this locally real quick and then get that running continuous integration workflow. So this code base we're going to be working in is just a clone of the repo from the previous video. So if you were following along in that one, you can just continue along and follow here. But either way, I'll have the link to this one in the description. I made it a clone because I don't want to make it confusing for people watching the previous video when we add some updates to this one. I could have done branches and stuff, but I think this is just a little bit more straightforward. One more quick thing, because Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is what I usually use, has some issues with opening the Chrome browser automatically from the terminal. There's kind of a known bug. I'm going to be doing this all in VS Code. So I'm going to open VS Code's terminal here. And what I want to do is I want to npm install as a dev dependency this @lhci/CLI. Now it's a dev dependency because I don't want this code to be in my production. It's really just for benchmarking purposes. So as this has completed, if we close this real quick, we can come down here and we can see that that package has been installed, and you'll notice that it doesn't even have a major yet. So this is still pretty heavily in development, but I've been using it for a while, so I thought I would just make a video on it regardless. But do know that it's probably subject to some change in the near future. So we're going to need one more thing to get this running, and that's a config file. And I'm going to jump over here to my browser, and I've already opened this tab, but let me show you. If you go to Lighthouse CI, this is the package that we're going to be installing. And then you scroll down here, there's a getting started guide. They're going to show you like a GitHub action basic example, but what you first want to run it locally is find this getting started, and I'll link this in the description as well. But scroll down here, and then they have a really basic config that they want you to start out with. or at least they have as a demo to start out with. So if we come back over to here and we add a new file in the root of our project, and it's going to be lighthouserc.js, we can then paste that. And really this is just setting, using a sort of temporary storage to upload what our reports are, because we actually could upload this to like a server or somewhere else if we wanted to. So now let's see if our code runs. So first we will need to run build if you haven't already done that. And the reason is because that build generates out this dist file, and Lighthouse is going to automatically look for those type of folders to see if it can like open up your, website essentially. So now I actually need a script, don't I? If we go over to here, I'm going to make a new one, and we're going to make the CI Lighthouse. Of course, name it whatever you like. It doesn't matter. And you want LHCI auto run. This is the pretty standard command that you're going to be using. Back to our terminal, npm run CI Lighthouse. So you can see it says run number 1 here and running Lighthouse 3 times. So by default, it's going to run it 3 times just so you can get a good average. And also you might want to notice this thing right here, automatically determine dist as the static dist dir. So you can set it explicitly if you want to. And that's just what I was talking about previously here, where the dist folder is sort of the root of our website, what's going to actually be, hosted. So now that that's done running, you can see that we have this report generated out here, .lighthouse CI, which has some various different stuff that you can look at. Let's close this for now. Let's see if we can open one of these and see what they look like. I'm actually curious. File Explorer, just going to open one of them. And here you can see our report that we can look at locally. So there's actually 3 of these that it's generated, and you can look at all 3 of them if you want. If we come back to our code, that's what each of these are. And then they're also going to give you some JSON data, which just allows you, if you really want to get crazy, to kind of dig in and read every little piece of this, and maybe even digest it if you want to write some scripts or something like that to do something with it, which is kind of what they're already doing for us if we add a little configuration here. So I actually don't want to upload this, so I'm going to ignore this folder. So I'll add .lighthouse CI. So I don't want to be tracking that because it's just going to run and dump for me every single time. I'm not worried about it. I'm not positive if you should be pushing this up or not, but I usually don't. So you can experiment with that if you want, but I just don't want to track it because they're just kind of throwaway files for me. So the next part here is that we want to actually be able to fail. You saw that we could open those reports and everything like that, but we didn't really get any of those warnings or failures that we noticed before when we ran it on the website. And that's because we're not using any sort of recommended settings. So by default, it'll just run and generate the reports. But what we want to do is we want to add this assert key. And then there's some presets that we can do. And let's see if they have that over here in the docs, just to follow it, just in case. Let's close that. So I'm looking for a recommended. Yeah, here we go. So there's this preset Lighthouse recommended, and this is usually what you're going to use. Let me do this. Oops. So this is just going to take their standard recommendations and run it through that. And that's actually just, quickly see what that's going to look like. So I'm going to rerun this command again, and we should get some different results because now it'll actually have some checks that it has to pass. Okay, and so you can see as it finishes here, it fails, exits with our status code 1. And if we scroll up a little bit, we can see there's quite a few things that we're missing. So there's 9 results here. It tells you the URL that it kind of opened and all that, and that it's hitting index.html, which is what we generate out, so that makes sense. And you can see it's failing on this Apple Touch icon, this CSP XSS, installable manifest. And notice that a lot of these we didn't see when we ran this through web.dev, which might be confusing at first. There were a couple that we did see, however, such as this meta description one. So what's actually happening here is that when you use web.dev, it's detecting that you don't have a progressive web app, but the recommended settings include progressive web app stuff. So typically you do want to try getting into progressive web app territory as far as your benchmarks are concerned. But that's like a whole nother topic to really cover and dive into if you aren't familiar with that. There's lots of documentation on it on web.dev. But for now, we aren't trying to do that because we have a very simple website and we're just kind of trying to get this going one piece at a time. And this is how I recommend kind of tackling it. A lot of times your site, when you start doing Lighthouse, will fail a lot of stuff at first. So you can kind of start lowering your standards. I'll show you a little bit about that, just so that you can pass, certain metrics. And at first you want to say, okay, I just don't want to degrade any from here, but we're going to be doing work to continually improve. So I'm going to close this terminal real quick, and I can actually change this Lighthouse recommended to Lighthouse no-pwa. Let's actually commit and push this up and see what it looks like in our GitHub actions. So in order to do that last thing, we're going to need to add it to our GitHub CI YAML here. Now you could make a whole nother job here, but like I usually do in this, especially when the tasks are so fast, I think it's better just to run it all in this one task, because we need our code to install and for our code to bundle and build before we can even run this. So all we really need to do here for now is say, let's add a new one and say Lighthouse benchmarks, whatever you want to name it. And then we're going to do npm run CI Lighthouse. So we'll do that right after we build so that we can run it. And let's see if that works. So I'm going to add all of this stuff. We ignored the Lighthouse CI. We added this config file and set it to no-pwa. Just some package install stuff. We added this Lighthouse script and the package. And that's our recent change. So that looks pretty good. Add Lighthouse CI. So then I will push these changes up, then jump over to the browser and see what that looks like. So back over to the code base here. This is the repo that I'm going to link in the description. We have this add Lighthouse CI, and it has started to run. Ooh, and we actually got an ESlint error along the way, which is kind of cool because it is showing that you can kind of bounce out early as soon as you have a failure. So strings must use single quotes. Okay, I can fix that. So we should be able to just open up our terminal and then run our npm run lint command. And we got this error here. I thought we were going to get this on the last video. I'm surprised that we didn't, but now we're getting one where it's trying to lint this dist main.js. So I'm going to take care of that real quick. So if you've been following along and you had this problem earlier, I apologize for not covering that. I was wondering why it didn't pop up in the previous one. But all we need to do is go to our package.json, say the dist, we don't want to be linting that because that's our output file. So when we run lint, we actually want to say / let's just run on source. And let's make sure that we do that on both here. Let's try that. Okay, and it looks like it was able to fix everything. So let's double check that it did do some stuff. That's weird. Yeah, so it has switched our config file to be what our linter has said now, so that should pass. Added that. It says it's modified these files, but I actually don't know how it has. But because I don't see any changes, I'm just going to add them all. Oh, weird. Okay. Fix linting issues with config and script. Push that up again. Go back over to our browser. We should have a new action running, of course. Now, of course, I could be streamlining this a little bit more and skipping any of those little errors that I'm having, but there's kind of a two-front reason on why I'm doing that. One, I want to show like what the continuous integration process is really like. These are the things that you're normally encountering every day. And also just kind of showing, issues and errors and bugs. I guess it's kind of the same thing, but more from a, even if you're an experienced developer, you're going to be doing this stuff all the time. And a lot of times people don't show that, probably for the sake of time. But I think it kind of creates a little bit too much imposter syndrome type of situations where, you don't ever get to see people with a bunch of experience like making mistakes. And we are all the time. So it's just kind of nice to be reminded of that. So now we finally got to our Lighthouse benchmarks. We passed all of our other tests, which is pretty cool. Oh, and then it finished. Okay, and so we got this exit code that we expected. Stop jumping me around. And we scroll down here and we notice that we do get this CSP XSS failure, that's hard to say, meta description, and tap targets. We don't get all the other ones. So it looks like our no-pwa flag worked. So let's finish this up or wrap this up here by starting to kind of tackle some of these things so I can show you a little bit about the customization you can add to it. So first, let's actually do some fixes. So here, the meta description one, if we click on this, it's nice. It gives us this nice little link. It says audit fails if you don't have a meta description. And this is typically like the process I go through if I'm not familiar with, what the thing is yelling at me for. And this one's pretty straightforward though. It's really just, you need a meta description. An important thing that they do note here is that they don't actually check for good meta descriptions. Can't remember where they say that in here. So they're just recommending it, but they're not going to fail you. As long as it has the name and the content, then you're good. So just for the purposes of passing this, that's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to head over to our source, our index.html, and then here we'll add a meta tag with a name equal to description, and then the content equal to, let's just do example site for demoing CI CD. Of course, not a super great one, but that's okay. If it were a real site, we would take some time and write a good description. Before we run it again, let's take a look at the other thing we failed on. So we can close this, go back to here. We could open this in our terminal as well, but since we're here, might as well. There's this tap targets problem. So if we open that up, you'll notice they say, tap targets are areas of the web that users touch on. Buttons, links, form elements all have tap targets. So search engines sometimes rank based on how mobile friendly they are. A lot of that's recent, by the way. Google's been pushing that a little bit more. And you want to make sure that, tap targets are big enough. You don't want these, it's annoying when you're on mobile and there's tiny little things that you're trying to click on, especially if they're close together. And so they're actually going to do some quick scans. I wonder if they tell us on ours. Remember when we ran this in web.dev over here? We had that report open. So you'll get a little bit more information when you open the browser one, which is kind of nice. So this tap targets one, yeah, here, isn't this cool? So when I dial this down, and you could just open that, the files that here the Lighthouse CI was generating, those browser files I opened, you could open those to check this as well. But if you run this against your real site, you'll see this type of stuff. And it's going to give you this hint that's like, hey, this input that you have with an ID of creature, maybe a little too small. And this button, maybe a little too small. A lot of times it's relative to like what it's next to, but that's pretty neat. So let's fix that. Well, because we're on this really simple example, and we don't really have, CSS in our Webpack setup or anything like that, I'm just going to do a real basic thing. I won't make you watch me type this out, but what I will do here is I'll just add a style tag in line here. And it's pretty simple, so it's probably the right place to do it anyways. We have this label, we have this input, and we have this button, and I'm increasing all of their font size up. That's pretty much the main thing I'm doing here. Adding a little bit more padding, kind of giving it some room. You just kind of have to play with some values and see, what'll make it happy. And now that we've done that, let's try to run this locally. CI Lighthouse. Oh, actually, we need to remember, this is a tricky one. We need to remember that we do have to build before we do that. I always forget that. Sometimes I will append it to my local Lighthouse run that it runs build first. It just kind of depends on the mood I'm in. So let's wait for that to run and see if those two issues were cleared up and we'll only have the one left. Okay, it's done running. It gave us a failure, which we expect, and it's really because of this. So we have taken care of the other two things. We only have this one result of a problem. So you can actually control click this. I think it's still control you in a Mac, but I'm not positive. It might be command. And they have this whole document set for this one. Now, the reason that I kind of saved this for last is this is a good example of where you might be over your head. Some of the other things we tackled are pretty easy changes, and you might be like, oh yeah, I forgot this. Or, oh, that's pretty simple. Let me just change it. But when you get into this is a pretty involved topic. You can really see that there's a lot of stuff put into here about this content security policy, and you definitely should be learning about all this. But what we're going to simulate here is, let's say, I came here and I've never seen this error before, and I'm trying to figure out I'm just overloaded with information, and I'm just trying to kind of get going with the CI process. I don't want you to really be blocked by that. It's something that you need to consider, but you probably want to get things running first. So in order to showcase this, what we'll do is we will jump back over to our code here, and I'm going to show you how you can customize a little bit. So for your Lighthouse RC, in this assert area, we can add assertions. I know that's kind of weird, but bear with me. We actually get the code for this assertion right here, okay? CSP XSS. So if we just add that, because that has a hyphen, we're going to need to put it in quotes. We can simply just set that to off as an example. So what I like about this approach Let me actually show it working before I start talking. We don't need to build because that's just a config file. What I like about this approach right here is that, let me scroll this down a tiny bit so you can read it. With setting these here, you are ignoring it, which you shouldn't be doing. You should be fixing this, but sometimes you just don't have time to get to that, or you're just trying to get things working, etc. But what's nice about this is it's a big, flag right here when you come into your config that someone turned this off. So it's not just like, deleting it completely out of it. You do have a sort of record that you can look at and be like, oh yes, we need to fix this. You should make some sort of task or to-dos for yourself to fix that. But at very least, it's documented in some format. So coming back up to here, we can see that we passed now. All results processed. We didn't get the exit code of 1 or anything like that. And so now let's commit that up and see if it passes in our pipeline just to be sure. So we added, a few little changes from last time, and then we ignored this one property. So let's say fix Lighthouse errors. Let's say failures. And ignore CSP XSS. This is where I would actually probably put a little bit more detailed description, because this is kind of an important note that you should say due to getting, and you can do 2 line breaks if you want to do more description in a log, trying to get LHCI up and running. We opted to ignore CSP XSS error. Let's do the line here. For now, due to being too complicated. Please do not ignore forever. Just whatever you want to leave a little hint for someone in case they're looking at Git history or anything like that. You never know. It's surprising sometimes how much that can help and make a difference. So back over to here, we go to our actions. And oh, I guess I just didn't push up, did I? Let's do that. Okay, reload this. We should have this new action running, and then we'll just simply wait for that. Now, one thing you'll notice from this, though, at this point is, we've run all our previous steps, and we're at the point where we're at Lighthouse benchmarks, and it's really taking quite a while compared to the rest of our pipelines. And so this is the point where maybe we wouldn't want to run this on push. We might want to run this only on pull request. You might want to switch that flag. It's honestly up to you. It depends. You don't want to inhibit your workflow too much, but you also want to know as soon as possible. So it's hard to strike the right balance. This time we can see that it actually did pass, though. Boom, 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 boom. And so we're pretty much good. I have one more thing that I want to share with you before we wrap this up. And that's really just to show kind of a little bit more about the configuration here. So a quick note is that you can do stuff like this back in our Lighthouse configuration file. And so you can even get to the point where, if you recall, jump back over to here. You know how we have these big old scores right here? And these are kind of the big numbers that everyone wants to be attracted to and catch. Well, let's say that our performance was like a 93 or something like that. And we're okay with a little bit of wiggle room. Maybe we only want to let it go down to like a 90. We don't want it to drop below a 90. So you can actually set that here. You can individually say, okay, I want the category performance to, have a minimum score of 93, 93, and, or maybe like SEO is extremely important to us, so we don't even want to go below like 100 or something like that. This is a way that you can actually cause purposeful fails if you don't meet minimum requirements, and that's where this really starts to take off and become a very powerful tool. Also, you can set this error right here to a warn if you really, don't really care too much about it. I don't really recommend it on these settings, but I would recommend it for something like this. Previously, we just set it to off just so I could show you could turn it off, but I don't really want to forget about this, right? I want to be warned about it. So just to speed through and show you kind of what that looks like, I've run the command one more time with those settings, and you can see that now we have this little warning symbol. So it actually will still pass. This will allow us to merge code and everything will be fine, but we won't forget that this is an important thing and that we shouldn't just leave it off. We need to tackle it at some point. That's kind of how I recommend doing things. Set yourself some standards that you can fall below. You have a new site, you probably want to be warned a little bit earlier. So I might want to change these to, 9.5 or something like that. And that's going to be 93, 95, all the way up to scale of 100. And then let's say, SEO. No, we have to have at least 100. So I will commit those up for you, those changes, just so that you have them in the repo. Let's come up with the name of this real quick. We'll just say, extra Lighthouse CI check restrictions added. So I'll push that up. And we've already tested that our pipelines run locally, so they should be fine passing, up on our repo. And I think that will wrap this video up. We've only sort of scratched the surface of Lighthouse CI. There's a bunch more stuff you can do. There's even a whole like setting up your own server and keeping your metrics recorded forever, which I'm considering doing a video on if anyone's interested in. But I hope that gave you a nice little glimpse into some of the power of it and the automation part of it, and how, you don't want to be sitting here in the browser rerunning this every single time you wait till your, thing goes live, your site goes live. It's a lot better to just automate that and catch it early. And it's going to stop you from pushing something to production that would have tanked your performance, and then you'd be scrambling to fix it, and who knows what it could be. It could take hours, it could take a day. This way you won't be allowed to push that stuff up ahead of time. You'll have some nice warning, and it can help you just continually improve your site. There's probably things that you don't even know that you're missing until you start using Lighthouse. So it's great to have it recommending changes to you early so you can have the best site possible. I think we'll call it there, and I'll see you next time.